meaning that they were not allowed to own land. But white men could and often did get permission in writing from the tribe.
Simply because the color is not the same as yours. Honestly, this is saddening. This is painful to watch. Hi guys, good day and welcome back to my channel. It's your favorite girl, Dora, and I'm back again with another reaction video. So guys, today I'm back with another documentary. This is not a song. The video is titled Native American Slave Owners Forgotten History. I can't wait to get into it, but before then, if you're new here, hello, thank you so much for stopping by. My name is Dora. Please consider subscribing to the channel. It will go a long way. Give me a big thumbs up if you eventually enjoy my reaction, and also leave a comment for me. I'll be glad to read from you. So without wasting much of your time, let's get right into the video. Saint Legion pictures. Okay.
Slavery is as old as civilization. Every culture and society practiced it, and were also victims of it. The North American Indians were no different. Various tribes enslaved other tribes, usually through raids and after battles, capturing their quarry. This included men, women, and children. Native Americans also captured whites and also had black slaves from the colonial period until the end of the Civil War. How common was Native American enslavement? Were there any major differences between Indian slave owners and other ethnic slave owners? Which tribes were the most notorious for enslaving others? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, a veteran of the United States Army and Marine Corps, former history professor, book author, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History.
No history should be forgotten. Forgotten history. Native American slave owners. Okay.
Many tribes practiced slavery. However, their primary practice was not based upon race, but more on their differences in tribal customs and the conflict between tribes over territory and resources. Many times, slaves were taken to replace those who had been killed, especially as laborers. Children who were orphaned were usually brought up within the tribe as their own, without distinction. This was also true of white captives, such as the famous story of Comanche chief Quanah Parker's mother. She was captured as a young girl and brought up as Comanche, and when forcibly returned to white society, she could not assimilate. But many Indian cultures captured or accepted runaway black slaves, and not all tribes treated them the same way. In the Iroquois nation of New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, which was actually comprised of the 5 original Iroquois nations, which comprised the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca.
Oh my God.
It was not uncommon, and chronicled by the French, that the Iroquois tribes were rather ruthless in the raids to capture slaves, black or white. And the captives often underwent very long, painful, and humiliating torture sessions to break their spirits.
I can imagine. Oh my God.
But in the colonies, in the mid-1760s, New York requested, as a requirement of treaties with the Huron and Delaware tribes, that they had to return escaped slaves, yet the record does not reflect that any were in fact returned. In fact, those that we call the 5 civilized tribes in the southeast United States, which were actually given that name due to their adoption of many European cultural values, to include centralized forms of representative government, conversion to Christianity, education and literacy, intermarriage with whites, and of course their participation in the ownership of black slaves. Much of this cultural assimilation was due to the belief by the tribes that if they acquiesced and adopted European methods, then they would not be persecuted themselves and pushed off their lands. These Native American groups primarily included the nations in the southeast, such as the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw Creek, and Seminole tribes. Ironically, only the Chickasaw and Choctaw failed to free all of the people they held in captivity until 1866, after the Civil War, when the federal government had to step in. By the 18th century, many Native Americans owned black slaves, and some tribes, such as the Catawba and Cherokee, were notorious for their dislike of blacks. Hence, their slaves were not normally assimilated, but worked like common laborers under often harsh conditions. The Cherokee were also famous for owning the largest number of black slaves purchased from white slave traders in the colonial period. It is recorded that in 1809, the Cherokee owned nearly 600 black slaves.
Wow.
Another unique fact was that the Cherokee Constitution did not recognize the children of black women as members of the nation. The Cherokee did not recognize formal marriages between their people and the black slaves in the Cherokee Act of Union in 1839, and this was revised in 1855.
What the world did was.
Those slaves who returned after the Civil War
really
were denied Cherokee citizenship. Although Cherokee Chief Lewis Downing tried to legally correct this, but he was overruled by the National Council, and the Cherokee National Legislature called upon the federal government to remove what they called the intruders. However, it should be noted that there was a sect within the Cherokee called the Choctaw Society, which was a secret abolitionist organization that ran its own underground railroad and protected runaway slaves. The Chickasaw produced cotton, corn, tobacco, livestock, and poultry for self-consumption, but also to sell on the open market to white Americans. Their use of black slave labor assisted in these projects, being that they were an agrarian-based economy. The Chickasaw also gave greater value to white mixed members over those who were black mixed, and in their culture, white mixed Chickasaw often became chiefs, but that was not part of the program for the black Chickasaw. In an effort to stop race mixing, Chickasaws were publicly punished for having relationships with blacks.
Can you imagine?
They were subjected to fines, whippings, and often expulsion from the nation. The Creek Nation had many interactions with blacks, and some took runaway slaves into their protection, although they still considered them inferior due to the type of field work that the men had to do on the plantations. Many blacks would become Creek slaves, or in some cases the Creeks would sell the runaways back to their white owners. During the 18th century, after the American Revolution, the whites placed bounties on runaways. In most cases, the Creeks refused to comply with the white demands for their return. During this period, few Creeks owned black slaves, but by the 1850s this changed, and after the Great Relocation West, where it is estimated that 10% of the Creek Nation were black slaves. The Choctaw in Georgia, in their 1840 Constitution, did not allow freed blacks or runaways to settle within Choctaw territory, meaning that they were not allowed to own land. But white men could and often did get permission in writing from the tribal chief or...
Honestly, this is hard to watch. This is painful. I can imagine what the world it must have been for them. What is the problem? Simply because they were black. This is disheartening. This is terrible. Ah, let's just continue.
United States agent in charge to live within the Choctaw Nation. Blacks or their offspring were not allowed to become citizens of the nation or hold office. But this was not true of Choctaw white men married to Choctaw women, and their children were considered members, who could then become citizens. The Choctaw also began to have an abrasive relationship with the Christian missionaries who arrived and built churches and schools, and this was tolerated until the missionaries began preaching that slavery, in its entirety, was antithetical to Christian values. Then the missionaries were politely told to leave. The Choctaw, like the majority of white slave owners, did not want their slaves literate. Most of the Indian slave owners had many of the chiefs of the various tribes who were themselves mixed race, living in both the world of the Indian and the white man. Some of these slave owner chiefs were also mixed Indian and black, such as the father of Medal of Honor recipient Pompey Factor, who was himself a black Seminole. The Seminoles were generally the most relaxed in their relations with the black slaves, and they generally welcomed them into their tribes, and the children of the mixed-race children were usually treated no differently than the other members, with Pompey Factor's father being a prime example, but this was not universal. Seminoles still raided plantations and took both black and white slaves. and many black slaves ran away to join the Seminoles, believing that they would have a better life. This was true until the end of the First Seminole War, after which the practice became too risky and the black runaways were often returned to avoid retribution from their white owners. General Thomas Jessup believed that if there was a second Seminole War, the entire southern region could explode into open rebellion, with black slaves revolting against their owners in alliance with the Seminole and possibly other tribes. During the conclusion of that Second Seminole War, these tribes took their black slaves with them along the way to Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma when they were removed from the American Southeast by the U.S. government. Pompey Factor's family removed west from Florida, and after the government forced relocation of the tribes, they ended up in Arkansas. Many were relocated in Arkansas. Some, like Factor's family, even went to Texas. Many of these Indians still owned their slaves, even as they were themselves being pushed onto reservations. The Seminoles were then thrown onto Creek lands, who were already there, and as the Creek practiced chattel slavery, some Seminole thought that was a great idea, while the majority did not. Regardless, the Creek and other tribes raided Seminole properties to steal their slaves. It was these actions that saw Factor's family and others escape into Mexico, where slavery was illegal. It was this push westward that carried chattel slavery into the frontier, setting the stage for future political conflict that would become problematic with the approaching Civil War pitting slave states against non-slave states. However, it has been documented that in many cases, blacks held as slaves by Indians fared much better and lived a better life than blacks owned by the majority of white masters. But then there were the tribes that did not own slaves of any kind, let alone blacks, who gave runaways sanctuary and made them part of their tribes. Some whites disapproved of the lenient treatment given to the blacks by their Indian benefactors and owners. The great Black Orator Frederick Douglass stated in 1850, "The slave finds more of the milk of human kindness in the bosom of the savage Indian than in the heart of his Christian master." One government official, a white Indian agent named Douglas Cooper, was somewhat disturbed by the relaxed, lenient, and almost equal treatment of blacks held by some Indian tribes, that he suggested to these tribes that they should invite white men in to teach them the proper method of handling the Negroes.
Can you imagine?
It is known that some Native American women bought male slaves, then freed them, married them, and then their children were born free according to the laws in the 18th century. As one may imagine, this practice was somewhat frowned upon by many in the slaveholding states later. The practice of Native American slavery was as diverse as it was common among their contemporaries. Some tribes had laws and councils that adjudicated the status of black slaves and even white slaves. The treatment of black slaves among their Native American owners was just as diverse when compared to whites, depending upon the tribe in question. But it is irrefutable that Native Americans, while not in their majority, were deeply involved in the black slave trade in varying degrees. Thank you for watching
This
Forgotten
video is
History.
really
Please
saddening,
click
and
like,
it's very,
subscribe,
very
and
painful
share.
to watch.
Send us comments and show ideas,
How?
and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Until next time.
How do you treat your fellow human like that? Why? Simply because the color is not the same as yours. Honestly, this is saddening. This is painful to watch. This is painful to see. Like, I don't like watching this kind of videos most of the times because it just spoil my mood. Just make me sad and just make me start to think about how people can be so wicked. And to think of the fact that it still happens till date, even though not like this, but like there's still cruelty, there's still wickedness, there's still racism. I don't understand. I can never understand why. It's just really heartbreaking and disheartening, and I just cannot understand. I cannot understand why you hate a fellow human. Someone who has two hands as you, someone who has the same features as you. The only difference is that you don't have the same skin color. Make it make sense. Why? I don't know, but it's really sad. It's really pathetic. It's really, really disheartening that this really happened. I sometimes wish all this was fake, like it never happened, like all this is just fiction. I sometimes wish, mostly I just wish that, but it happened. It happened, and it's still happening indirectly till date. People are still being oppressed, people are still being enslaved. I don't even know what to say. Thank you guys for watching this one with me. Please share your thoughts with me. Let me know what you think. I would love to read from you. And please share this video with your friends and loved ones. That's one way you can support my channel. Give me a big thumbs up if you enjoyed my reaction. Please consider subscribing. It will go a long way. I would really appreciate that. I love you. God bless you. Stay safe out there. It's very important. And I'll see you all on my next video.